The United Nations Children Fund has been active in Zimbabwe since 1982, just after independence, upholding the rights and welfare of children and women. That's over 4 decades of partnership through changing times. Our conversation today focuses on how that commitment has evolved and where it's heading in 2026. My name is Osli Matikenyeri, and on today's episode of The Diplomat Couch, we are joined by the UNICEF Representative to Zimbabwe, Ms. Etona Ekole. Welcome to The Diplomat Couch.
Thank you so much for having me, Osli.
It's a pleasure. How would you characterize UNICEF's role in Zimbabwe today?
It's a good question, and it's a good one that comes at a special time for UNICEF, because UNICEF will be 80 years old globally in December of this year. And so that gives us a time and a moment to reflect on UNICEF's role in Zimbabwe as well as globally. And characterizing UNICEF's role in Zimbabwe, I think what we can simply say is that UNICEF is a champion for child rights in Zimbabwe, as in other countries in the world. And what we seek to do is to really promote the realization of child rights in Zimbabwe. And we're talking about, right to survive, to life, a right to development, to have an education, the right to have clean water, safe water and sanitation, the right to be protected from violence, the right to participate, to engage in civic activities, to have children's voices be heard, and for their perspectives to be taken into consideration in decision-making matters, in policy. And so we're here really to ensure that government, which is a state party to the Convention on the Rights of the Child that guides our work, is actually working in favor of realizing those rights.
And upholding the rights and welfare, like you've put it, of children has been central since 1982. How do those core principles that you've spoken about shape UNICEF's practical work on the ground in Zimbabwe?
Well, we've been operating here since 82, but with the adoption of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which came much later, we moved the focus from really responding to the needs of children to the rights of children. So in the beginning of UNICEF's time in Zimbabwe, the focus was very much on delivering basic services. And we were here at the sort of, a couple of years after independence. So the focus was very much on reconstruction, on construction, and really building the systems to enable access to health services, to education, to water and sanitation for children. We were really focused on aspects of immunization, nutrition, bringing health services closer to children, and also ensuring that children went to school. But over time, those roles, they've stayed, but they've been refined. So we moved from looking at just access and responding to emergencies, etc., to, let's say, the focus on the HIV response in the 90s. And in the 2000s, early 2000s, that's when we were really pushing the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Following the adoption, we started looking much more at protection. Protection matters, protection from violence, protecting children, and again, really protecting vulnerable, orphans and vulnerable children, especially at the height of the HIV pandemic. And I could say that further along in 2000s and up till today, the focus has really shifted very much to systems development. We want to ensure that, and when we talk about systems development, we're talking right from policy formulation and ensuring that we have the legal frameworks that will allow for the delivery of services to really all children. And so that's where our focus now is, very much on service systems strengthening rather than service delivery. And all of the principles, the principle of the best interest of the child from the convention is what we try to ensure that we're putting into practice. Principles of participation, principles of neutrality, the interrelatedness of rights. Those principles have guided our work right from the 80s up until now, and we continue to leverage and to rely on those principles to direct us, especially at this time of immense change for children. And the global landscape has changed for development very much. So the rights of children becomes even more important for us to uphold, to protect, and to really push partners, governments, our development partners, civil society, all stakeholders, to really focus on preserving gains from the past and protecting the rights of children going forward.
You've touched partly on it, from transitioning from services like immunizations. Those are very highly visible emergency responses. But are there other areas, you've talked about policy frameworks, are there other areas of UNICEF's work that may be less visible publicly but quite tangible in changing people's lives in Zimbabwe?
I mean, I think the most obvious one would be data. Data is not very visible, but it's needed for all the things we do. We have to collect data to be able to program, to know where the most vulnerable children are situated. And then we can tailor our programs on the basis of that data and know exactly whether or not we are achieving the results as we intend to. So I think data is not very visible. You are collecting data perhaps through surveys occasionally, but routine data, the people collecting data all the time, that doesn't really get to be seen. What is perhaps more obvious is the vaccination campaigns, what we're doing with regards to water and sanitation, taking textbooks to schools, etc. But yeah, I think data is an extremely important part of what we do.
Thank you. And to our viewers, if you've been wondering what visible work, or like she said, some of the work is not as visible but very tangible in changing people's lives in Zimbabwe that UNICEF is doing, join us in the second segment of the Diplomat Couch. If you're just joining us, you've just joined the second segment of today's episode of the Diplomat Couch, where we're joined by the country representative of UNICEF, Ms. Etona Ekole. Before the break, we were talking about some of the work that you've been doing on the ground. It's been 4 decades of partnership and child rights, and UNICEF's cooperation in Zimbabwe spans health, spans water, education, protection, and UNICEF has supported immunization programs to protect children against preventable diseases and HIV you mentioned in the first segment. What has been the most measurable outcome from those efforts in the recent years?
I can speak to several. Where I think UNICEF, we're very proud of the progress that Zimbabwe has made with regards to immunization. We're looking at immunization rates, 90% of children being immunized against most of the antigens, or practically all of the antigens, is something to be commended. I think a second one would probably be on HIV. The country has come a long way with regards to HIV prevention and treatment, and Zimbabwe has achieved the 95 target, going even beyond 95, and that really simply means that 95% of people who have HIV are aware of their status and they are receiving treatment, and then they've also reached viral suppression. And that's one of the highest on the continent. And UNICEF is very, very proud to have supported the government in that regard. I talked to you earlier about education. and how Zimbabwe has made important strides to enrolling children into primary education. And we are very happy and pleased to have been part of that effort to bring more children with, again, very high enrollment rates compared to other countries at about 84%. So there's lots and lots of progress and achievements in UNICEF's engagement in Zimbabwe over these last 4 decades. But the road is not, it hasn't been completed yet. We still have lots to go, lots to do, lots more to do. I talked about HIV prevention treatment, the 95-95 target, but we still have, especially children who's, and adolescent girls who bear the burden of HIV at the moment compared to adults. And I think that's a place where we need to focus our attention. And you also have, for instance, we've managed to get children to school, but are they learning? And so we need to focus much more on learning outcomes and whether or not children are leaving school able to read, write, and also in later years able to transition into tertiary education, but also into employment. So there are still things to be done, lots and lots of things to be done, and that's where our efforts and our attention is now focused on, really meeting those gaps and those needs that remain.
You've talked about education and health, but there's a care group model for city communities that you are championing. How is this community-led approach improving child nutrition in urban areas, and what makes it effective for families facing daily food time constraints?
I suspect you're asking that question because we're UNICEF, and nutrition is really sort of the bread and butter of what we do. And really, UNICEF began in 1945 with regards to providing nutrition to children after the Second World War. But yes, the care model is just one approach that we have. We have lots of different approaches to address the nutrition situation of children. And in Zimbabwe, we're looking at what we call a triple burden. So we have the situation of undernutrition, we have micronutrient deficiencies, which is, children not receiving sufficient iron, vitamin A. And then we also have the emerging issue of obesity. And so part of this approach, the care model, is really on supporting preventive measures, getting the right foods, nutrient-dense foods to children. But there are others as well. We are trying to work much more on large-scale food fortification for children to receive micronutrients, and really just working on the food environment so that children are not exposed to unhealthy foods, and have the diets that allow them to grow and thrive and really be able to learn as well. So the care group model is just one, but we have lots of different approaches to tackle that triple burden of nutrition or malnutrition.
And then education is another pillar that you've touched briefly on, but you've recently launched the Learning Passport in partnership with the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education and Microsoft. How is that digital platform expanding access to learning in Zimbabwe?
Well, we launched the Learning Passport in 2021. As a response to the fact that children were not able to go to school because of the COVID pandemic. And so bringing digital learning to children allowed them to continue learning even when they stayed at home, and also for teachers to maintain that interaction with children. So digital learning is a new frontier. I mean, it's democratized learning, if I can say so. A lot more children can access wherever you are, even in the most remote areas. If you have certain devices, you have your tablets, etc., you can continue learning. You can actually learn when you don't need to have a physical school as such, but it requires an investment. It requires the equipment. You may also, obviously internet would be good, but you do have offline servers that allow that digital learning to happen as well. So you are able to reach more children and to have children learn even when they're unable to go to school physically. And sometimes they just can't go to school because perhaps floods have broken down, bridges and roads, so they can't access their school. So they can continue learning even when you have, climatic shocks, etc. Or as we saw during the pandemic, they continued learning. So it is a new way of enabling access to remote areas, but also children perhaps with different disabilities who may not be able to easily access school. So digital learning is certainly something we're focusing on, training teachers for that, trying to get the equipment for that, solarizing schools so that they have the energy to be able to power these devices.
Thank you, Ms. Etona. When we come back in the third and final segment, we continue our conversation on the work that UNICEF is currently doing in Zimbabwe. Welcome back to today's episode of The Diplomat Couch. I'm your host, Osli Matsikenyeri. And today's episode, we are joined by the UNICEF country representative, Ms. Etona Ekole. We move on with our conversation to youth participation and the next generation. There is growing recognition that young people need to be more active in shaping Zimbabwe's future. And UNICEF has been expanding the platforms for youth engagement and participation in policy and developmental decisions. How is that changing the way young Zimbabweans participate in governance and development?
Well, I mean, I am very proud of the work that we do with young people, and I have just been in awe at what young people in Zimbabwe are able to do. We have some extremely dynamic group of young people that work directly with UNICEF. They provide advice. We have the Adolescent Youth Advisory Group that provides advice to actually the UNICEF with regards to its program and how we implement our programs, providing their perspectives. And it's easy to obtain some of those perspectives because we rolled out since 2015 something that we call the U Report. It's a platform that allows for young people to express their views and to contribute various perspectives with regards to things that matter to them. And so we've been able to use U-Report to gain a lot of feedback, reaction, perspectives from young people, and that has shaped how we also interact with government, for instance, and with other partners. So for instance, this was used for youth engagement during the development of the youth policy and the youth strategy. And so their voices were very much reflected. You mentioned other platforms that we have. We have the Youth Parliament, we have Junior Council. So all of these platforms have really been used to facilitate youth engagement in pursuit of child rights, first of all, and some of them are still children because they're under 18s. So the adolescents really are shaping. They're shaping decisions that affect them. They're consulted by various partners, by government partners, by donors as well. So I think they're really playing a critical role in their own development and expressing what they would like to see government and partners do, development partners do to support that development. Because really, as they say, nothing for us without us. And they want to not be considered the future, but really the force of today that is driving Zimbabwe's future.
And you've mentioned that Zimbabwe has a very young and dynamic population. And youth employment is one of the national priorities under Vision 2030. How does UNICEF's work connect to equipping young people with skills and opportunities for the future?
Well, I mean, we have education programs that now will be focusing very much on skilling. So in terms of what children learn in school, adolescents learn in school, yes, they'll be learning maths and all the regular subjects, but we also want to ensure that they're obtaining the necessary skills, skills for life, skills that make them ready for employment. So problem-solving skills, negotiation skills, creativity. Those are also skills that need to be learned. It's not innate, or they're not innate. So our program, the pedagogy that we're promoting with the Ministry of Education, lays emphasis on those skills as well. But we do also have, even as we have these platforms also enable young people to build those skills ready also for transitioning to the world of work and to create jobs for themselves. But more specifically, we are now looking at models where we want to be working more and more with vocational centers to prepare young people, for them to create also their own jobs. And our work with some of the innovation labs, we have a lab that we support in Rua. It's really providing a space for young people to develop their digital skills as well, and to also prepare them with these soft skills so that they can transition to the world of work.
And looking to the next 5 years, what are UNICEF's key priorities for strengthening partnerships with Zimbabwe when it comes to health, education, and the protection of children?
Well, our focus areas will be on child survival, because that's an element that we are still lagging behind on. We want to ensure that fewer children die at birth, and also within the first 5 years of life. So that focus on survival and early care will be important for us. And that enables you to actually bring in integrated interventions in health, nutrition, water and sanitation through facilities like health centers, but also through community level interventions, and with national structures like the Ministry the Ministry of Health. But yeah, why not the Ministry of Finance as well? Because that entity will need to support the Ministry of Health in actually rolling out a stronger system, primary healthcare system that protects children with various programs like expanded program on vaccination, etc. So that's the first priority. Our second priority is really, as I said, on education, quality education and skilling. Really ensuring that children are coming out of school capable of the basics of education. But then as they grow higher up, we're also preparing them for the world of work. So that quality education and also skilling is something that's very important to us to work with partners on. And then the third part would be on protection. We're very, very keen to see that children are protected from violence, but also that they have sufficient cushion with regards to poverty. And so if they are particularly vulnerable as a result of poverty, then they have those social protection measures that enable them to really continue to learn, continue to receive good nutrition, continue to receive health care. And so that protection element is something also that really begins with having that legal identity. If you have legal identity, it becomes easier to access those quality services. And in all of that, we will ensure that we're using, as I mentioned, data. We need to know where the most vulnerable children are to reach them and to be able to bring them into the system. We need to be able to ensure that we are not focused only on urban areas, that really the children who are in the most marginalized of places, we're connecting them. And so yes, UNICEF's role is really as a connector, as a convener of different stakeholders, so that children are not left behind. Children become really core to the development aspirations. You talked about Vision 2030, that children are core to the development aspirations of Zimbabwe. And that, children are constantly also protected from, these shocks that the country receives every so often, climatic shocks, financial shocks. So we need to really cushion children from those shocks, make sure that we're building communities' resilience, family resilience, to be able to cope, to anticipate shocks, but to cope when they do happen. So really, those are our focus areas for the next 5 years, and we count on also the participation of our partners to take this vision forward.
Ms. Ekole, thank you so much for joining us on the Diplomat Couch, and thank you for sharing on how UNICEF's partnership and community action are building a healthier, stronger future for every child in Zimbabwe.
Thank you for having me, Ashley. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And to our viewers, I hope this episode has been insightful as it has been for me. Goodbye.